Hey everyone, welcome back to UX Design to Win in Business. My name is Nils, co-founder at Dinghy, and with me today is also co-founder at Dinghy. Welcome back to the show, Daniel.
Hi.
Cool. So today we're kicking off a new series. This is going to be 6 or more episodes over the course of the next few weeks. And we want to make it super tangible to understand where UX design sits in important business processes, where we believe that your big levers are, and how to get there. And today we want to share a few examples that we lived through over the last couple months. And our hot take to come in today is, in fact, that UX design is probably not the solution to your problem. And that's me saying it, hosting a show called UX Design to Win in Business. So let's untangle what we mean with this. And for this, I brought Daniel today because he lived through all of these examples with me. We want to take it step by step on to explain what we mean with this. So our job usually is to make some sort of artifact. For example, a website, an app. So if customers approach us, what they usually have in mind that we should help with building is a finished thing, right? Like any sort of digital product. And that's how we come in. But what we discover usually, especially for bigger organizations or for scaling businesses, for anyone who's probably more than 100 people already, that we can't really get to work right away. Right? I think
Yeah.
this is where it begins.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Usually we have quite some ramp up to do to get into the building phase.
exactly. And
Yeah.
ramp up, what we mean is that we are not the type of agency who just builds you a website however you imagined it. I know that sounds a little bit annoying, but we're here to strategically guide you to running a successful digital product. And to do that, we have to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve. And this sounds a little bit trivial, I suppose, because mostly I think what people are looking for when they are asking for a website is a website with the expectation that as soon as you put this online, you solve the problem. But our experience actually indicates a little bit something different. And that is that as soon as you put your website online, you're starting with the actual work, right?
Yeah.
Like the website in itself will get outdated. It's probably outdated as soon as we put it online. And so we're here to talk today about all of the different communication silos that you have inside of your organization and that we actually have to connect and breach through before we can do any meaningful work. For that, we want to look at two examples. One is for our current project at SumUp, and another one is from an example we had last year with our dear clients at Clever Cards. These projects came out of different directions, but had similar challenges to overcome, I would say. Dan, can you maybe guide us through the Clever Cards one? I think you were actually even closer in the beginning of this.
I don't know. In most of these projects, what happens is that our clients they did some research internally already. So they approach us with a task to come up with a design that improves the user experience of a product that they already have at hand. So in our case, we were looking at a tool that was built for internal use originally. It was an admin dashboard that now had to be retrofitted into a project or a product that was customer facing. So we're talking B2B, so there could be some training involved to get people onboarded and so on, which usually is possible to do if you have reasonably complex product. We had the additional task to make it easy and intuitive to use because there was limited support power in the teams available. And we knew there would be many people on the dashboard at the same time. And so we had to take care of not triggering too many support requests by having a design that is complex to use or to not easy to understand. We can, of course, go in and make the interface look nice. We can, of course, spot violations of best practices in terms of user experience. But often the processes that are managed through a project or an admin interface are in itself very complex and suboptimal. And so you can tweak the interface any way you like, and you won't get anywhere with an intuitive product because it can't be. It's inherently impossible to do so. So
Yeah.
you need to look at the processes that are below the interface at the inner workings to understand also what the requirements for the business are and also what the constraints from a technical point of view are, to see if you can shortcut these complex processes into something that is maybe less complex and thus easier to use.
Yeah, because so I think that is a very important point to make. That's also going to apply for our second example. Something that is often overlooked, I would say. And that is, yes, there's an external customer. And by that, we mean anyone who pays for your services. Doesn't matter if it's B2B or B2C, like whatever you're making in your organization, um, has to work for the end customer in that sense, right? And in this example, those were accountants at bigger organizations. Like the task was, imagine you're an accountant working at a bigger organization and you have to order digital MasterCards for your staff. You have to sort of be able to manage them, have to put money on it, take money away from it, check that transactions are made for the right type of thing. So if someone goes on a conference, they're supposed to pay for a plane and a meal and a hotel, but not for, I don't know, whatever else is available in that destination. And you, as the accountant, should have an easier life, like it should help you do your job, right? But at the same time, there's always the element of this product has to be run by your organization too. So it has to work for your internal staff as well. And ideally, it doesn't like create more work with every customer coming onto the platform, but ideally, it should be possible to manage a large crowd of customers with a small internal team. At least that's usually the goal, right? And that's where the processes come in that you're talking about, where we have to optimize. Exactly. And so, I mean, the way that it comes to these processes is Clever Cards is a fintech. So where they started out was with the technical part of even proving their business idea, right? Like they had to be able to technically issue a MasterCard and get it on your phone. So their first priority was not to build like a beautiful app, but to even prove their business case, to prove that they could do it. And we were the aftermath, right? Like we had this, people could make a MasterCard, and now what? How
Yeah,
do
I
we
think
get this?
yeah, the interesting part is that everybody could do it in this admin interface, but it wasn't clear what you were doing at all, because for the people who built this admin interface for themselves in the first place to trigger the functions that had to be called on an API to issue a MasterCard, they knew what they were doing. But accountants using that tool now didn't know exactly what was happening, and they didn't know about the steps that had to be taken to issue a MasterCard. And so this language barrier had to be kept to get people to actually use this tool and enjoy using it and not being frustrated.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the first time we logged into whatever they had, right? Which was, you probably saw stuff like this before, right? It has a button for every single piece of functionality that your platform can, in fact, perform. But it's such a specific language on these buttons, on how stuff is called, on a list view, on anything in there is, of course, super domain specific knowledge that has to be translated for people who are not in your core backend developer team, I guess.
Yeah, and this is a good point that maybe leads us to other projects that we've worked on. If a company gets big enough, it's not even that the terminology is specific to the company, but then it's specific to certain teams. And even people at the same company will speak different languages of the product in the end, basically. So they use different words for the same thing in the same company.
That is a very interesting aspect. This is like a mix, right? Like this is so you have domain specific knowledge about the space that you're operating in as the organization. If you're a fintech and you're issuing MasterCards, then, well, most people in the company probably know enough about this problem space and what it takes that the general thing happens, that somebody somehow gets a digital copy of a MasterCard on their phone. Like the general premise is probably clear. But if you speak with the specialists who implement the API to the MasterCard server, they will probably use different language than people all the way at the other end of your organization, somewhere in marketing, that they will probably not use the technical terms that are the correct ones to describe what you're doing. They will talk about, well, and then you get a MasterCard on your phone. Right? And in between there's other departments. There's like the people like you in charge of business development who have to take decisions in which way to develop the product in general. And you probably also use different words to describe what you're doing on a strategic level, right? That is something that is probably not even confined to digital products. This is probably like a problem
Yeah,
of humanity, I guess.
yeah, and it's tricky, I guess. We know from the technical and digital products that most technologies come with a certain jargon that is used by people who are very well versed in that technology, but that is not of any use to a customer.
Yeah, I mean, this is how we ended up in our job anyway, right? Like we always, I think, and that's the classical way to look at agency work, I suppose. The idea is to get support from the outside, from someone who can solve a problem quickly for you, and who takes information about your product and translates it into something that a broader audience can understand. We always had this translation challenge going on, only that products are becoming more nuanced, also more specific, and to spot the places where you actually have to effectively translate from one language to the other, like to even know where you're coming from and where you're going is becoming harder to identify, I would say, because the lines are being blurred with product development, especially in the last couple of years. Like I'm thinking about the conversation I had with Rob from Interview, who was talking about like how they developed Siri back in the day and how that was way too advanced for what people could actually fathom back then. And that what Apple did when they got Siri on is that they actually stripped away 70% of the functionality because it was nobody could deal with this at the time, right? Um, and but yeah, so I think let's pick up the topic. Let's keep it in mind. Communication between departments or between areas of expertise, I guess, not necessarily departments, is definitely a problem. And that's also where we started with the summer project, is that we were hired to make an app, like to make a user-friendly app for a specific target group. Awesome. That's exactly our ballpark. But to do this and to get this off the ground, the only way for us to get there was to talk to different groups internally at the organization, because the job of our app was to present information together in one place and enable interaction with this data in this one place that comes out of different silos internally. This sort of work where you effectively have like a bunch loose ends tangling around, I would say. I think it's a very critical point to keep an eye out for those loose ends. That, I mean, it's clear how these things come to existence, like your organization scales, people come in, people come out, teams grow bigger, teams get split in half to grow bigger again, right? Like we all know how this goes. You got to work with legacy. There's like new systems being invented. And as we also said before on this podcast, the challenge for the next 10 years is to have your business data accessible and workable in a central format that actually unlocks your organization to get anything done, right? And to grow and grow and grow and to create more silos will inevitably at some point blow over. Then you're at a point where if nobody can talk to anyone anymore because the domain specific language is so specific that other departments or other groups don't understand what you're talking about anymore, then your organization grinds to a halt. I think that sneaks up on you. Like it's something that you can easily overlook or easily have this notion of, well, you know, there's a reason why it came to be, and it's probably good that we have these silos and that these groups can work individually and so on. As someone who comes in from the outside and often has the job to work with different pieces of those silos, our experience is that if they get out of hand, that you can really approach like a bad state of your business, that you're really running into issues that you should be trying to avoid. I think this is also why we're talking about content management so passionately, because UX is important, but data handling and how to talk about this data is probably even more important going forward. I don't know. What's your
Yeah,
take on this?
I think you're probably at least missing out on opportunities if things are too decoupled. And this is the part where we talk, for example, about content management, because if the content management is done right, then it's easy to reuse it in different places. And this actually presents a lot of opportunity to get going fast. And usually this is what we are approached with is, can you do it fast? And a good content management system, for example, allows us to be fast because we can look in one place and change certain aspects of the content and play it out at different places and stuff like that. And that is a huge opportunity, I think. From our experience, I also think that we had to learn the hard way that we often were the next silo with our user experience expertise that we basically put on top of what was already there. So we came joined a project, came up with a nice design, with a nice experience, and tried to put it to work by whatever we could do, and that often was not very successful. So we took this step to circling back to the ramp up to actually understand how these different languages are spoken and who is talking to whom and what the connections are and where the bridges should be built before we actually started to get into our expertise.
Yeah, and
And
who's the customer of each of these things, right?
yeah,
Like internally or externally.
yeah, exactly. And to look at all these things, that is basically what we're doing for the most part, is to understand like where do things like where do touch points align, or where which touch point triggers processes in which silo basically, and see how
Yeah.
we can connect this before we even start to build the like a streamlined process or user journey that connects these dots.
If something struck me over the last 2 or 3 years in our work, the rise of generative AI is one thing in there, but I would say even apart from that, or even before that, the technical implementation of the solution, if that's programming or designing, or if this is just using a platform like whatever SaaS thing, anything, like to make the thing in the end, once it's clear what needs to be the thing, that is, it's a complex, it's sure, it's a thing to do. Absolutely. But this is not the hard problem, I would say.
Yeah,
Like,
I agree.
right? Like whenever we had ramp up, whenever we had handoff, whenever we were an extension of an existing team, as for like something that we had often, of course, is that customers had designers, they had marketing people, they had programmers, sure, but they didn't have like a specific user experience person, for example, that ties all of this stuff together. We've been in all of those roles. And the thing that always took the most effort, also, I'm not even sure if it took the most time, but it for sure took the most effort, like the most brain power out of our brains, but also the ones from people inside of the customer's organization. Like usually it's someone higher up, like a decision maker who sees a challenge or wants a product or has some certain business goal, who approaches us, and then we go in and start to dig and start to work with people at the company and talk to them and talk to those people and understand what needs to be done to make this thing a reality. And I think the most intense part is really the translation between the different ways of talking about the same thing. Like, and that can be, again, that can be areas of expertise, that can be departments, that can be hierarchy levels, that can be internal, external, doesn't matter actually.
Can actually be the goals of a product. Like, what do you want to achieve?
Exactly.
Even there's often some confusion or disagreement.
And that is so hard, right? I mean, in fact, if I now that I think about it, this is the entire reason why we're running this podcast. That the communication between the expertises, like to bridge the gap and to have the other side understand where you want to go with something, that is actually the hard part, right? Like,
Yeah,
this is, there's no way around it. And I believe personally, if we say, look at the loose ends, then I think it's almost easy to blame the technical solution. You know, like it's easy to say, um, well, our workforce is very slow because we have a very old, mediocrely set up version of SAP or whatever. Sure. But how did it come to this? Right? Like,
yeah,
how did you end up in a situation that you say, our instance of SAP is not ideally set up or people can't work with this? Right? So, it, this is probably like, I'm not saying that SAP generally has like a great UX or whatever, but that's not the point. The point is that it's proven to fulfill a purpose if you use it right. And that probably applies to most of the tools out there. No real tool that you pay money for is probably just bad from the get go. If you don't pay attention to the loose ends, and that is if people understand what the business goals are, like I think that's even, maybe that's the most important one, to have like a shared goal of where you're going inside of your organization? I'm not sure. But yeah, so to bridge those gaps and to have people understand the challenges on the other side of the chasm. And it's so hard. Like every time we go there, I'm always amazed of how much time it takes and how many different angles you have to or points of views you have to take to look at a certain challenge. That I think this is really the hardest thing that we'll have to deal with also the next 10 years when it comes to digital product development.
But it's also very nice to see that once you start working on these perspectives and look at all the different viewpoints, then it can resolve actually. Like there's also a lot of opportunity in there, and we like this is what we mostly do is we talk to people, we document it, and then we find the common themes and the common ground, and suddenly it becomes easy for everybody to understand what we're talking about. And that's actually very powerful and very rewarding also.
That's so, yeah. I mean, even in our recent project, actually, probably you're totally right. Like in most of the projects we have, as soon as you reach the point where there's a common understanding to a certain degree of what's happening, and especially why it's happening, I think that is also a point that is easily overlooked. That people in your group don't just say, yeah, okay, whatever, they probably have a reason, but that they actually get behind the driving force of your idea to understand why we're doing this. I think that is so powerful. And we always, like, I just had like the best example of this. Like, we discussed a feature that just involved like 4 different groups of people because it had to connect to 3 different silos and we had to make one thing with another team. And so we had this group of 12 people who had to understand where we're going with something. And we discussed, like, at some point, I really thought, am I doing this wrong? Like, why? Like, I had the feeling we were going in circles. We had to start all over again. Like, at some point, I really doubted the design of the whole thing until I realized the design was not the problem at all. Like, we saw this because we ran usability testing on the feature itself, on the design. And it was, to my big surprise, one of the best features we ever designed, I guess, because like it really ran through smoothly for the target group that it was designed for. But to get everyone on board who had to chip in to make this feature a reality, that took weeks of alignment. And now that we're there, like now that everybody knows what they're supposed to do, we barely even have to talk. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me, I have to say. Like now it's probably going to be done in 2 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's
But
so crazy.
This takes time and effort.
It
and
takes
needs to be invested, yeah.
It takes time and effort, but also it's easy to underestimate. Like it's easy to underestimate how big the struggle with a new idea actually is amongst your staff or amongst key roles in the project. That is something like if you don't get people there all the way, then it's so easy to just lean back and think, well, they probably have their reasons. I'm just going to tag along. But you don't want people who tag along. You want people to actively take the shovel and help.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So communication probably always has been, but it's just now, yeah, always also in our work surfacing as one of the main challenges to overcome, which is very interesting that the actual doing of the thing is taking second row, I would say. Cool. So that was the first episode in this series. I hope you could take something from this. We're going to continue with 5 more episodes in this. Maybe we're actually going to prolong the series a little bit. We might intercept it with a couple special episodes, but I'm gonna tell you if that is the case. But then I want to work through how to approach tying together the loose ends, I would say, until the end of the year. And that's what we're doing. Dan, thank you for coming on today, and for doing this with me.
Sure.
Cool.
My
All
pleasure.
right. Awesome. See you, everyone, in the next episode. Until then, you know what to do. If you want to support this show, leave us like comments, likes. If there's anything, if you don't want to miss like a new episode in this, then please follow the show at whatever platform that you're on. It really gives us like a positive signal to continue with this sort of content. And also, of course, if there's stuff where we're still not doing the best job at bridging the gap and communicating, also let us know. Like, we're really on a mission here to bridge the gap between designer, product, mumbo jumbo lingo, and the real business world, because we believe that there's a huge potential for organizations to benefit from. Amazing. See you on the next one. Bye.
Yeah.